Live from wherever you happen to be, it's the SNL Hall of Fame podcast. And now, here's your host, curator of the Hall, Jamie Dew.
Ah, yes, the sweet sound of bells ringing me in as I enter the SNL Hall of Fame. Welcome once again to the SNL Hall of Fame podcast. I am Jamie Dew, as you just heard from Doug Donatz. Thanks, Doug. It's always nice to have a voice like that calling you in. So there's that. How are you doing this week? I hope you are well. We've had a nice run of episodes through October, and now here we are in November. And the show has been a lot of fun this season. I don't know about you, but I've really enjoyed myself. I found it getting better and better. Now, whether or not last night's Kieran Culkin episode did it for you or not, remains to be seen. I'm recording this prior to airing, so I can't offer you an opinion. But I'm sure if, again, based on what we've seen this season, they seem to be cooking along in just the right way. So there's that. What else can I tell you about the SNL Hall of Fame? Well, I can tell you that each week we visit the Hall of Fame, or are visited rather, by a guest who brings along a candidate to add to the ballot. Once that ballot is full at the end of this season, we will open voting, and voters will have to choose. Among the nominees, they'll have to choose 12, and they will submit those. I'll do some tabulation, and if you're not ready for primetime player or musical guest or host or writer exceeds the threshold of 51%, or gets 51%, I should say. They don't have to exceed it. They don't have to hit 52%, or I would say 52%. They need to hit 51%. They need to be on 51% of the ballots that are cast. And if that is the case, they will be part of the first class of the SNL Hall of Fame. So it's very exciting, and it's very easy. All you have to do is listen and play along when the time comes. If you're interested in joining us as a guest, please reach out, Jamie at snlhof.com. We'd love to talk turkey, see if we can record a new episode or two. That would be great. There's some great episodes coming up in the next little while, and today is no exception. Today, I'm joined by SNL Super-Fan Thomas Sena, and Thomas and I get the pleasure of chatting about Second City alum, Wisconsin native, tour de force, Chris Farley. Chris Farley was a cast member on the show during the 90s. He had a really meteoric rise to fame, ended up in the movie pictures and doing all sorts of great stuff. But he's often, most often remembered for his time on Saturday Night Live. And rightly so. He burned out like a lightning bolt with all that energy and all that creativity bubbling out from him, and his, sort of aw shucks kind of manner. Chris Farley, I don't know, to me defines what a Hall of Famer should be. I'm not sure if his short career will affect voting, but we will have to wait and see. For now, let's enter the hall and talk to our friend Thomas Sena as he adds Chris Farley to the ballot of the SNL Hall of Fame.
So
I watched a bunch today just to keep,
Yeah.
I have a terrible memory, like terrible. So I refreshed myself today with some Farley,
Okay.
and man, I was laughing out loud so much. Like, what a tour de force.
Oh, a force, powerful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just such a powerful performer. Like Lorne, that's how he described Farley. So I bet it's been enjoyable for me to go back, and I watched the documentary I Am Chris Farley that came out.
I've never heard of this.
Yeah, I think his brother Kevin was behind it. It came out in 2015. I just rented it on Saturday and I watched it, and that was great too. I've read Chris Farley. It's called The Chris Farley Show. It's like an oral history of him, and I read that just a few years ago. I read it. So Chris was like, he's very near and dear performer to me, just in general. So I bet I'm sure you had such a blast going through it.
Oh yeah. So before we get into why Chris Farley, I think one of the things that I'm noticing people asking me about this podcast is like methodology. Did you approach this with any sort of methodology for inclusion? Like, were there hallmarks that you were looking for nominating Chris Farley?
I think I chose Chris Farley at first because of just a feeling that he evoked. I couldn't sit there and tell myself nuts and bolts and technical comedic aspects, but it was just a feeling like, man, I love Chris Farley. Like, he really left an imprint on me. I think I could talk about him. And actually, I don't know if you've ever seen this website called onesnladay.com.
I have, yes.
So I used that actually and went through, literally I scrolled through every episode and basically pretty much just trying to look at the screenshots that the guy picked of each sketch, and just if something like really called out to me, like, oh yeah, I remember that one, I would just jot it down here in my Word document. So I really literally just went through one SNL a day, every episode that Chris Farley was in, and just skimmed through just to kind of jog my memory. And then I went back and actually watched those sketches. And just to refamiliarize with myself with them. And there wasn't a sketch that I hadn't seen before. So it was just rewatching sketches.
So tell me a little bit more about this book that you read, the Chris Farley Show.
So the Chris Farley Show book, I think it was released over a decade or so ago. But it was really just going through Chris's life. He grew up in Madison, Wisconsin, and everything like that. And it was just people telling stories about Chris. Like, it made me feel like I was sitting there at the table with Tim Meadows and Adam Sandler and Bob Odenkirk and all of these guys just talking about Chris, and it was such a really neat insight into the guy who I thought I knew just from how he portrayed himself, and to people kind of confirming like, yes, that's how Chris really was. And I actually used to work with somebody who knew Chris Farley, who grew up with that family. So he would tell me stories about Chris from their days in Wisconsin. And really funny. He said Chris was really funny, kind of the life of the party, would go the extra mile to make everybody laugh. And just the stories that were in this book, the Chris Farley Show, just really emphasized and hammered down the home what I already kind of felt about Chris Farley.
So when we
highly
connected,
recommended. Yes,
when we connected and talked about, who you might choose for cast for the SNL Hall of Fame, it seemed like a slam dunk.
Yeah.
To borrow a phrase.
Yeah, no, it was absolutely a slam dunk.
Chris Farley.
You're right on that. Yeah, he just evoked this emotion in me and a lot and many SNL fans, and I think Just kind of thinking about the show, in general, when people think about Saturday Night Live and what they love about the show, and especially what they loved about the show between like 1975 and the mid 90s, or when they were children, it's not they don't break down sketches and say, well, I loved this punchline, or I loved this joke, or I loved this set piece. They don't really to break it down technically. It's really this I loved. It's an emotion sort of thing. It's a visceral kind of thing, and that's what Chris Farley did for me. I loved Chris Farley and the way he worked on a visceral sort of level. It was the imprint that he left on me is what made it a slam dunk to choose Chris Farley for this. And there's technical aspects to Chris and his performance that make it so he deserves to be in the SNL Hall of Fame, but it's really like the emotional imprint that he left as well that makes him a slam dunk.
Yeah, there's just something about seeing him on screen. He grabs the camera, he absolutely grabs the camera. And whether it's, a bit part that he's playing, but more often when he's playing, a front and center role, he absolutely dominates. He is just so dominant. And I know that in my research, John Belushi was somebody that he admired.
Yes.
And like he's got that. He's got that just nailed.
Yeah, you just
like
couldn't look away.
Enigma.
Yeah, exactly. You just could not look away. And Chris did idolize Belushi, but he also made sure to differentiate himself from Belushi. Growing up, Chris is a Second City guy. He honed his skills in Chicago, and that's kind of Belushi stomping grounds as well. And Chris definitely did idolize John Belushi. And of course, you're right. Like, his tenure, and especially when he first got on the show, the comparison to Belushi was just a no-brainer. And I had thought about that, just kind of reminiscing about Chris and maybe his ties to John Belushi. And there was always something, and I didn't catch John Belushi live. I was still a very small child when he passed away. But just the sketches and just the things and movies that I've seen John Belushi in, he was very funny, and I definitely respect him, and I'm sure you'll be talking about him at some point. But there was always something that I felt that I didn't know about Belushi. Like, there was some sort of humanity that maybe he purposely didn't quite portray. It seemed like he was always in character. So I felt like watching Belushi, I was watching a really incredible performer, but I didn't feel like I knew who John Belushi was. Whereas Chris Farley, his humanity soaked through. So I would watch Chris Farley on screen and felt like I knew who Chris Farley was. He was this down-to-earth Midwestern guy. I could see the humanity come out in him. John Belushi was like a super talented alien from outer space who came down here to perform comedy for us, whereas Chris Farley was the guy next door to me. I felt like I knew Chris Farley more than Belushi, and that's not a criticism of Belushi.
No, I think you're bang
at all, but it's just
on.
The feeling that I got. Like, Farley was a version of John Belushi who I felt like I could connect with, on a human level.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting that he comes from Chicago. Interesting tidbit, I suppose. He started Second City the same day as Stephen Colbert, and
yes, that's right.
He was part of the tour initially, and then graduated up and did 3 reviews as part of the main stage before arriving in New York and setting the world on fire on Saturday Night Live.
Almost immediately. He wasn't a featured player. This was I don't know if you remember, but there was a stretch of years where they did featured players, and then they did with, and then they did the repertory cast. Yes, exactly.
And he was with,
mm-hmm.
like it was with.
Like it was almost
So
like I
strange.
always picture like a Whitney Brown as like that quintessential with guy. So you're right. That's how
right.
Chris started.
Yeah, it was him and Meadows and Chris Rock and Julia Sweeney. I think I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure they were the ones. And he graduated to the main cast the next year. So he was only 1 year in that role, and then boom, he's part of the main stage at SNL. Is there anything about that early period SNL Chris Farley that jumps out at you? Do you remember the first time you saw him?
I remember seeing him, which is odd because I know that, you know, a sketch that we'll talk about maybe a little more in depth is Chippendales. Obviously, that was in his 4th episode, Chippendales.
Jeez Louise.
Yeah, but I remember Chris Farley showing up in a Twin Peaks sketch, and that was the first time he ever appeared on the show. He was in this Twin Peaks sketch where Kyle MacLachlan was hosting, and they were doing this parody of Twin Peaks, like it was the Who Killed Laura Palmer, right? And so Chris was playing I forgot the character in Twin Peaks' name, but he was this guy with a ponytail or whatever. He was basically admitting like, no, it was me, I did it. And he was telling Kyle MacLachlan, the detective, like no, I'm admitting to it. And Kyle MacLachlan was still like trying to solve the case. And the joke was that, you know, he was so attached to the town that he was just trying to like keep the case going. And I remember Victoria Jackson played a big role. Mike Myers played the little person who came out and did his thing, but Chris just came out and it was almost like, who is this guy? And you're right. You brought up that he just owned the camera and he was a performer where even if he was just talking normally and it was just on screen or just next to somebody, like you couldn't help but not look at Farley. Yeah.
So the Chippendale sketch.
Yes.
I think that's a sketch I remember watching with my family. I think my mother and father were this was at the time where it was known that I stayed up, and they stayed up with me because they were probably watching it in their room anyway.
Okay.
All those years that I was sneaking watching it in the main TV. So now all of a sudden we watched it together, and I can remember my mother, like pissing her pants, like just pissing her pants at that sketch because Swayze was such a sex symbol at that time.
Oh, absolutely. I actually brought up the sketch to my wife a couple of days ago, and I brought up Patrick Swayze, and I could tell she was kind of like swooning, and I looked at her and just kind of laughed. I'm like, wow, honey, but that's the effect that he had at the time.
And it just showcases his reckless abandon, like, and his physicality, the physicality that this gentle giant had. He was so nimble.
He was so athletic, man.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. He do like the worm in that sketch at one point. He did the worm next to Patrick Swayze, and I'm like, I couldn't even see Patrick Swayze being able to accomplish that. But here you have Farley utilizing his like football and rugby skills and his natural athleticism he was like a bull in a china shop in that sketch.
Great.
It was unbelievable. And it was the physical style, but also a lot of the reason why I love that sketch, and some people could maybe overlook it also showed his like kind of down home aw shucks kind of style too. You know, after they danced and he and Patrick Swayze talked to each other in the back, they were like rooting for each other, and they weren't enemies. They were actually like had a bond and were like good friends, right, in that sketch. And you could just see Chris kind of with his aw shucks, like, oh, you were so great, man. So you immediately saw the physical, energetic Chris and just kind of the human, Midwestern nice guy Chris, and just in that one sketch.
His eyes. Yeah. He's got these eyes that just, like you're right, they just express that humanity so well.
Yeah, so that was his 4th episode. too.
Gee
And
whiz.
usually we don't see, if you think about this, the cast for this season and those featured players, I don't know if they would really give like Punky Johnson and Andrew Dismukes and Lauren Holt, like I couldn't see them putting those
like a showcase spot
like showcase spot like that. But Chris couldn't be denied. And even before he got to SNL, Mike Myers, who performed with him at Second City, he said he knew immediately, and I get the feeling this isn't even hindsight talking. I genuinely believe that Mike Myers saw Chris perform and said, "Oh, this guy's gonna go and do big things," because he couldn't be stopped. He gave Lorne and the writers no choice but to feature him, and it was Jim Downey who wrote that sketch, who was a seasoned writer for SNL. Who wrote that sketch and gave him a chance as well.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that was a Jim Downey sketch, and it's interesting.
Jim Downey.
Yeah, go to a Jim Downey rabbit hole after that one. But the interesting thing too about that sketch is I think it brings up some conflicted feelings in a weird way, and kind of speaks to maybe who Chris was. Because he, leading up to that week, he was good friends with Tom Arnold. So I guess he had called Tom Arnold and expressed some slight discomfort about possibly having to do that sketch. He said, like, Lorne wants me to be like the fat guy dancing with Patrick Swayze, and I don't know, are they going to laugh at me, and this and that, and
Are they laughing for the right reasons?
Yeah, and I think that's something that Tom Arnold maybe brought up to him too. Is like they're laughing, they'd be laughing with you, and not at you. And but I know Chris did say that he was hesitant going in, and I know Chris Rock and Bob Odenkirk have been outspoken about how much they don't like that sketch. Which is interesting because they say that they were just making fun of Chris for being fat, and they thought it was kind of mean. I personally was laughing with him, and I admired him in that sketch because it was the not give a crap kind of attitude, and he was just himself, and I know Bob Odenkirk and Chris Rock, they knew Chris, and I think they're entitled to their opinions. But I hope they're at least comforted to know that I think most people felt a bond with Chris Farley and were laughing with him during that sketch.
Yeah, well said. So if you had to sum it up as to why he belongs in the hallowed halls of something as hoity-toity as the SNL Hall of Fame, how do you do that?
I think Chris Farley had that perfect secret sauce that we look for in a sketch performer, where he could be he could play the physical part perfectly, but he could also dial it down and show some of that humanity. He could play the straight man every now and then, even though in his later seasons they really leaned on the screaming Chris Farley kind of archetype.
Sure did.
But I think especially in the early years on SNL, he was pretty versatile. He was a tour de force, but also you would see him in a sketch. I think it was that might have been in the middle season. When he started the Chris Farley show, he was just like this aw shucks, like that was the perfect encapsulation of Chris. So he gave you, he took you on a ride with every emotion I think that you could have in while watching like sketch comedy, and that's what Chris did, and I think he left such an impression on people that for me he was a slam dunk for the SNL Hall of Fame.
What are some other highlight sketches that you want to talk about?
I think a pre-tape one that sticks out was Schmidt's Gay. And
oh my God,
that was a classic with he and Sandler, just riffing on the the stereotypical beer commercials that showed scantily clad women and objectified women, and they turned it around, and he and Sandler were ogling these men around the pool, and Chris played that so earnestly. And he's even like, he lives on in a GIF where he's raising his sunglasses. Like, I see that GIF to this very day as a response to different things. But that one definitely stood out, and I liked that as a kid. Funnily enough, because I understood the humor, I understood that they were poking fun at the kind of, I'm gonna say toxic masculinity, but in a lot of ways it was. Those beer commercials were absolutely. So Schmidt's Gay, that was like season 2 for Farley. The Chris Farley show is one of my all-time favorites.
We could spend a lot of time talking about.
We could spend 2 hours talking about just his interview with Paul McCartney, I think.
Remember that interview that he did with Jeff Daniels? Remember that one?
Yeah, that was awesome.
Hi, I'm Chris Farley, and this is the Chris Farley Show. And tonight, my host is Jeff Daniels, one of the greatest actors around, I guess. God, I hate doing this part, man. I never know what to say.
No, you're doing fine, Chris. You're doing good.
Really?
Yeah.
No, I'm not. Anyway, Mr. Daniels has done The Purple Rose of Cairo, Terms of Endearment, Arachnophobia, and Something Wild, which is an awesome flick.
Oh, thanks. Thank you.
You remember in Something Wild when Melanie Griffith had you handcuffed to the bed? Remember that?
Yeah.
And you had to make that phone call, remember? And you were chained to the thing and you couldn't get away.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
That was awesome. Okay, so you were also in The Purple Rose of Cairo.
Yeah, I was. Yeah.
Remember when you were doing your movie and Mia Farrow was watching, and then you came down off the screen and talked to her, and you were in black and white when you were on the screen, but then when you talked to her, you were in color?
Yeah, what about it?
You remember that?
Yes. Yeah.
That won some awards, didn't it?
No, not really.
Oh, dang it, what an idiot. I'm sorry. No, you're doing another movie. What's that called?
The Butcher's Wife with Demi Moore.
Oh, yeah, Demi Moore. She's married to Bruce Willis, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Did you see Die Hard?
Yeah, I did.
Remember when he was, he had to cross all that broken glass without his shoes on, and there was nothing he could do about it, so he just walked down all the broken glass with his bare feet?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Did you like that?
Yes.
Yeah, I did too. That was awesome. Okay, we're gonna open up the lines now if you want to talk to Jeff Daniels. Okay, there's someone on the line. Hello?
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 Yeah, is Jeff Daniels there?
Yeah, he's right here. Go ahead.
Yeah, hello.
Yeah, Jeff, my name is Dawn, and, do you remember that scene in Arachnophobia when you went into that barn and you found that big spider?
Yes.
And you figured out why there were all these spiders everywhere?
Yes, I was in that scene. I remember.
Oh, well, yeah, it was great.
Thank you.
You sound familiar. Did you call in last week when Arnold Schwarzenegger was on the show?
Oh, yeah, that was me.
You remember when you asked him if he remembered when he said, "I'll be back" in both Terminators?
Yeah?
That was great.
Yeah, that was great. Yeah.
Well, thanks for calling.
Okay.
Oh, wait a minute. The stage guy's waving at me. Oh, we're out of time. Well, that's what it means when he waves like that. Remember a couple of weeks ago when you were doing the show and I didn't see you waving? Well, that's it for this week's show. Thank you to Jeff Daniels, one of the greatest actors of our time. God, I hate trying to end these things. I suck at that. Was that okay?
No, you're doing good. You did fine. Yeah, you did fine.
Okay, I hope so. Sorry.
Yeah, he in the third season or actually this was the second season. He did Jeff Daniels and Martin Scorsese interviews for the Chris Farley show. But the Paul McCartney interview, when he said, "You remember when you were in the Beatles?" That line just cracks me up to this day. But that was Chris. That was an exaggerated version of Chris. But that was really close to how he was. He was very shy. I think in a lot of ways, he felt like he wasn't worthy of being in the presence of like a Paul McCartney. So that's how he.
I also feel like it's a bit of a rib on Lorne too, right? Like it's a bit of a rib, like because most of the guests that are on the Chris Farley show are sort of the crew that Lorne hangs with.
Right. Yeah, you're right.
You know,
yeah, exactly. Like why was
McCartney,
Martin
Scorsese
out there? Like I think Scorsese was just visiting Lorne, actually, because I don't even think he was part of the show in any real way that episode, other than just being friends with Lorne. So I think you're right. I never thought of it that way. That's a really good point.
So yeah, there's just something about it that like I'm guessing he was acting as the voice of the entire cast that were sort of like, holy shit, Martin Scorsese's like just hanging out with Lorne Michaels this week. This is crazy.
Yeah.
Remember that, and then leave it to Chris Farley to just say, yeah, I'll pitch a sketch. I'll pitch a sketch where this is what we do.
Exactly. And I always imagine too, like maybe the people who knew Chris behind the scenes and worked with him saw him as just this aw shucks kind of guy with nervous energy around people. I think David Spade was maybe talking about this, where Chris would be kind of nervous around women, and he would he would even say stuff and then hit his head like, "Oh, that was dumb. What an idiot," or whatever, like how he does in the Chris Farley show. But I think the writers probably took a lot of elements of who Chris really was and helped him construct that. And that's what I mean with his humanity. I can't imagine, and again, this isn't a negative, but I can't imagine watching John Belushi do something like that. The John Belushi show, and kind of exposing himself that way. I can't.
No, there's something about Belushi that's like too cool for school, right. Kind of. Mm-hmm. Not to ride on him, but
no, he was incredible. But it's just he was more of an enigma, and he was more guarded. Where Chris,
that's right.
Chris put himself out there, and I think the Chris Farley show was the perfect encapsulation of Chris as a human being. So that one always sticks out as well, as does Matt Foley.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
The motivational speaker.
Go with Matt Foley.
Yes,
exactly. I mean,
and specifically the first one with Christina Applegate.
That's right.
That was the peak of Matt Foley, and whenever I watch it, I watch different things. I don't know about you, but I just notice different things in that sketch when I watch it.
Well, you stop watching him and you start watching everybody else, and you feel envious that they had a front row ticket to the literal Chris Farley show, and he was playing for them. Like he's playing for the camera, and he's doing a good job with that, but he's also playing for this tight little ensemble that's in front of him, and he's professional enough to not try and make them break, but he's straddling that line that's like, I need to be good enough that if they do break, I'm doing my job.
Exactly. He may have been trying just a hair to see if he could make David Spade break just a little bit. And you can tell, next time you watch this, watch David Spade, watch Christina Applegate, and watch them try to hold their laughter in. And Christina Applegate has talked about this in a documentary they did on Chris a few years ago, and she said that was rough. She said I had one line in that whole sketch and I could barely get it out. I was sitting there trying to compose myself because you're right. She had this front row front row seat to the Chris Farley show. I'm so jealous of Julia Sweeney, who played the mom in that sketch, and Christina Applegate, and even Phil Hartman for having a front row seat to that. You're right. And when he picked up David Spade during the sketch, Spade didn't know that was going to happen. That was just something Farley did.
He just went with it.
He just went with it. So when he picked up Spade, everybody was like, "Oh my gosh!" And when he dropped Spade on the couch, you could see David Spade just kind of like trying to hold in his laughter because he did not expect that. And I don't think they expected him to jump through the table either.
Oh wow!
Yeah, I think that was a surprise to everybody as well. And Phil Hartman did an amazing job of not breaking. Oh, they all did. When you're watching just a bull like that do his thing. That's impressive.
I rewatched the one where he's in the prison today.
Okay.
It's one of the later ones, I think. Might be even the last one. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it was like a Scared Straight kind of premise.
The Scared Straight one,
yeah.
Yes. It's not quite as good, but it's still really funny because it's like they're all Spade and Schneider and Tim Meadows are all, in this semicircle. Mm-hmm. And they're just sitting back watching him do his thing. And Martin Lawrence is really funny in it as well, but like they're just watching him do this thing and it's great. It's just great. And then, you talk about the humanity that you've talked about already, which is the catchphrase, right?
Yeah.
Live in a van down by the river. There's something that is so deeply sad about.
Yeah, you're like empathetic, like
Yes.
Yeah, you really feel for this Matt Foley character. You feel sorry for him that like what circumstances led to him having to live in a van down by the river. Why is he so eager to want to move in with that family? Or that he does bring out the humanity in that. That's a really excellent point. I think with that character too, even though, there was maybe diminishing returns as far as when Matt Foley reappeared, but it was always going to be an engaging, fun sketch because of Chris. And they put him in different sorts of situations. Like you mentioned, he was in the prison. He was there was one, I think, in the last season where he was in, I think, Mexico, but it was in Spanish. He did like a Spanish Matt Foley kind of thing. And even that worked for me because of Chris Farley.
And because you're just also sitting there waiting for that catchphrase.
Yeah.
Yeah. So good.
Exactly. And of course I would say it to my friends, and I would do Matt Foley impressions and repeat it to each other and all of that. So he definitely left an impression on all of us.
The other character that I think that, I don't know if you've got him jotted down, but the other character that to me always stands out and I feel like I use in real life is he appeared on Weekend Update always.
Yeah.
Bennett Brower.
Bennett Brower, and I'm doing the air quotes, Bennett Brower, who appeared on Weekend Update. And yes, I love Bennett. I did actually write Bennett down as a highlight.
Yeah, so wonderful. Just such a great highlight of that Weekend Update time.
Yeah.
Pretty similar character, just Chris Farley looking uncomfortable in a suit. A suit maybe a size too small for him. Glasses on.
The lights making him sweat.
The news. Yes.
Yeah.
You can see the flop sweat. You can see it all, and it's just brilliant.
Yeah, there was one memorable one where it was a blooper where he was supposed to be whisked away on a wire. And the wire, they were lifting him up, and it got caught on the Weekend Update sign. The wire did. So Kevin Nealon had to kind of get up and improvise and or loosen up the wire so they can actually really hoist Bennett Brower off of the set. But and Chris improvised when he was kind of stuck there. He's like, I have a little bit of a weight problem, and I don't know if they could get me up. And he was just kind of like, that was all just improvised by Chris. And I think maybe a character like that, it probably tapped into some genuine insecurities that Chris had, that he was able to share it comedically. So that's an excellent example. That's a very good example, Jamie.
Yeah, so good.
And
I think. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I think we alluded to his last season, and it's kind of a famous season 20 in SNL. It's really famous amongst fans because it's of it being a train wreck kind of season. But I think Chris had the best sketch in what was an otherwise pretty bad season, the Japanese game show sketch.
Oh God,
that was in season 5.
So
I have fond memories of that one, and to me, my mind says that it wasn't in that season because I don't have fond memories of that season. But that sketch in particular, when Chris plays, of course, like this guy from Wisconsin he and his wife are vacationing in Japan, he somehow ends up on this game show. And I think if, there's maybe some problematic, like Mike Myers playing an Asian, which he really leaned on that oddly around that time. But I think, setting aside him playing this, Asian stereotype, I think the actual material was really great. They were actually speaking Japanese for most of that sketch as well.
Really?
Yeah. And I was wondering, I just saw some comments on, I think, one of the videos that I watched of that sketch, but somebody actually took the time to do like a little transcript of what they were saying, and most of it was Japanese, which I guess maybe excuses it a little bit. But Chris just played this like kind of like just happy to be here kind of character. I'm a fish out of water, but I'm just kind of go with it. And that was a really memorable sketch in an otherwise kind of dismal season. That was
the year that, like, basically at the end of the year, like, I don't know, 2/3 of the cast was like ceremoniously dumped.
Yeah.
Nealon did his last year that year. Sandler did his last year that year. That was Farley's last year. And then there was a whack of people that were part of the cast. Maybe not Michael McKean. Chris Elliott.
I think McKean. The next season, I think Chris Elliott came. McKean, I think, was already in the cast. Jay Moore. That might have been Jay Moore's last.
They just dumped a whole whack of people.
Yeah, they really did. And it's kind of funny how the season actually ended, which was memorable for me too. I don't know if you remember.
Remind me of this
sketch. It was a Norm Macdonald sketch, so it was a really weird sketch. But it was Tim Meadows, Chris Farley, Jay Moore, Norm Macdonald, and Adam Sandler playing themselves. And they snuck into the Central Park Zoo, and they were at the polar bear cage. And one by one, they found different reasons just to basically jump into the polar bear enclosure, and they get mauled. And it was such a weird, and I like it. I rewatched it this morning actually to make sure that I actually remembered it well. And I'm like, was this actually good, or was it just something? But it's a polarizing sketch amongst fans. But it was in a way that it was kind of their way, Norm Macdonald's way of saying goodbye to these cast members is having them mauled by polar bears. And so it's really just funny banter between friends. And like I said, they were playing themselves. But like after Tim Meadows and Jay Moore and Adam Sandler jumped into the polar bear cage, Chris's reason for jumping in was, well, I'm going to go get their wallets so I could have some beer money. And then so he jumped in to go retrieve their wallets. And it was a very weird sketch, and I can see why people might not like it, but that was a way of them basically saying goodbye to the show. It was almost like the infamous after the Robert Downey Jr. Anthony Michael Hall season when there was that fire. And Lorne basically only saved John Lovitz from the fire. That's what that reminded me of, is just how they said goodbye. So that was Chris's last ever sketch, was him jumping into a polar bear cage at the zoo.
Oh wow. And then he goes on to a pretty decent movie career. And then, of course, an untimely death at 33 years old.
33, absolutely. And I was 16 when he passed away. And that was one of the first celebrity deaths that really affected me, was Chris Farley's, for sure. And that was a couple of months after he hosted the show. And he wasn't in great shape when he hosted the show.
He was not. They did the cold open, or not the cold open, but the monologue rather is, gosh, correct me if I'm wrong, but the monologue, he ends up sleeping with Anna Gasteyer in his/her dressing room, while Tim Meadows basically stalls for time, and then Chris Rock stalls for time. Like, I think,
Chris Rock was part of it too. It was part of the monologue.
Lauren and Chevy were part of it.
And
Chevy Chase were.
Basically, I think the idea too was Chris was reassuring everybody that he was okay.
Yes.
So he was maybe reassuring Lauren that he was going to be all right, and then he was reassuring Tim Meadows and Chris Rock that he was going to be okay.
That's right.
But he just looked. I know Chris was always pretty overweight, but he looked bad. He looked sweaty. He looked, I remember watching that, even thinking when I was like a 16-year-old, he doesn't look great. And unfortunately, he was such a great performer that's not necessarily my lasting memory of him, but it's just really weird to think that he was gone just less than 2 months after he hosted the show.
That's bananas. I didn't realize it was that close.
Yeah. It was, I think, October he hosted, and by December he passed away. Maybe it was December 18th or something.
Away, right? Yeah. Oh. Well, it goes without saying that he was lightning in a bottle.
Yeah.
And we only had him for a short time, but I think that voters for the Hall of Fame would be remiss if they didn't take your nomination and run with it all the way to the voting booth and elect him into the Hall of Fame. Like, I think he's a first ballot Hall of Famer.
Yeah, definitely.
For sure.
Yeah, Chris deserves
and
it.
I'll be shocked if he's not.
I would be too. Definitely.
Yeah, I think you did a great job.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk about a performer who I genuinely loved watching.
Awesome.
Oh, yes. What a terrific talk that was with our friend Thomas Sena. Thomas, thank you so much for stopping by. We'll be hearing from you again in the future for sure, as you add another not ready for primetime player or musical guest or host or writer to the ballot. Time will tell just who that will be and when that will be, but you can rest assured that you'll be hearing from SNL Superfan Thomas Sena again. Really great conversation, and I'm thrilled I got the chance to have it. Off the top of the show, I was talking about Farley's career potentially being a little shorter than normal, and maybe that buggering up his chances of getting into the Hall of Fame. But if you look backwards, at the time that Farley was on the cast, that was a pretty standard amount of time. Nobody was really creeping into the 8, 9, 10-year category outside of Phil Hartman at that time. And I believe for a time, Phil Hartman was the longest tenured SNL cast member, soon eclipsed by Tim Meadows. So there's that. Hope you enjoyed yourself. Hope it all makes sense to you. If you have any questions or concerns, don't hesitate to reach out on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or Jamie at snlhof.com. I'd love to hear from you. But for now, that's a wrap on this week's episode of the SNL Hall of Fame. So as you walk out the door, don't forget to please turn out the lights because the SNL Hall of Fame is now closed.
Thanks for listening to the SNL Hall of Fame podcast. You can find everything you need to know about the show at snlhof.com. Don't forget to subscribe, share, rate, and review the show wherever you get your podcasts. This is Doug Denance saying, this is Doug Denance saying, see you next month in the hall.
To podcasts and such.